بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وآله وصحبه ومن والاه. So we're moving into the 2020, that is to say 1442 series of lectures based on Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious sciences. Since alas we can't be in Spain thanks to the virus, we're doing it from the UK, but alhamdulillah the book is timeless. The one I want to look at in these sessions is called Kitab al-Niyya wal-Ikhlas wal-Sidq, which translates roughly as the book of intention and sincerity and truthfulness. But as we'll see, these Arabic terms tend not to correspond quite exactly to their semantic equivalents in the English language. And much of the work that we have to do, I think, is to drill down into these Islamic ways of dividing up these inward states of man to see where the English equivalents work and actually where they might lead us in a wrong direction. So we will be sticking close to the Arabic. The tradition in the Ummah is always to present these issues on the basis of a commentary on a text which has achieved popularity and celebrity amongst the greatest ulama of the Ummah. So this enormous subject is here presented really as one of the culminations of Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya. Much could be said about the reasons why the Imam structured the book the way he did, and that debate is ongoing, but this comes towards the end. It's 4 books before the end, the 7th in this Ruba, and it's followed by the book of Muraqaba and Muhasaba, that is to say self-scrutiny, calling oneself to account, Kitab al-Tafakkur, the book of meditation, contemplation, thought, and finally the book of the remembrance of death and what comes after, Dhikr al-Maut wa ma ba'dahu. So it's coming towards his climax, but the Ihya is not a kind of opera that has an overture and then themes that come up and again. The Ihya is more sophisticated than that, and those who have made a wird, a regular habit of reading it, perhaps a book every week or a book every month, the ulama have different ways of processing the Ihya with their students, will find that its order relates to a kind of processing of the movement of the outward towards the inward, not in a kind of philosophical way, but in an empirical way, how human beings actually experience the journey into what is the most interesting part of us, maybe the only interesting part of us, namely the inner life, the inward horizons, as the Quranic text expresses it. And this text clearly raises a number of issues that have a characteristically Islamic resolution. And we think at the outset that it's fairly clear what intention is and what sincerity is and what truthfulness is, and why do we need 100 pages to deal with these issues. But as we go through the books, we'll realize that enormous issues are raised that are actually of vital importance for the proper practice of our deen and understanding of the deen, and for operationalizing the process whereby religion sinks in and becomes not just skin deep, but becomes a reality in the heart, rather than just something that, for whatever intention, trips easily off the tongue. So the journey from formalistic religion, rusum, into a religion that's actually based in inward encounter and reality is part of what Imam al-Ghazali is talking us through here, because clearly these are 3 interior virtues, 3 things that you can't see in another human being. Sometimes you can read the runes and diagnose some outward signs. Sometimes the hypocrite and the sincere person are quite easy to differentiate, but for the very good hypocrite, that might be difficult. We might believe that we ourselves are in control of our intentions and that we regulate our religious lives properly, but we very soon understand, when we get into Imam al-Ghazali's very fine psychological analysis of what's going on when we mean to do something, that there's actually something very subtle. And as he says in a quite explosive passage, we don't control our intentions. We can control the pond in which the intentions swim, as it were, but we can't actually fish them out and tell them which way to go, because they exist somewhere below the surface of our awareness. And for those of us who think that, yes, we know that the intention is what religion is all about, and we're resurrected on the basis of our intentions, and actions are by intentions, and we control our intentions. Well, one of the things that Imam wants to talk us through is the reality that controlling our inward moods and motivations is not such an inward thing, not such an easy thing. Controlling what we do outwardly, relatively easy, compared to what we do in that space that seems to be ours alone, where nobody else can reach, which is our inward life, where all of these mysterious creatures are swimming. So that's one of the things that we have to learn, that this is not just an important issue, in a sense an all-important issue, but it's also an issue of very considerable complexity. And we'll see step by step as we go through these books how essential it is for the improving of our religion that we get these "why am I doing this" arguments straight. Because just to say, I intend to pray Zohar 4 rak'ahs, in a sense that's not an intention the way the Imam means, it's just one of the actions. And it's a condition for the validity of the prayer, etc. But it's not something that in itself guarantees the quality or the acceptability of the prayer. So we'll go through all of these issues, and the Imam, as we've seen, divides this chapter into 3, and you can learn a lot just by seeing the concepts that the Imam marries together in the titles of these books. So it's niyyah and ikhlas and sidq, and we can more or less see that that is a journey to do, first of all, with what's going on within, and then the things we can do to make that within more hospitable to a good niyyah, and then how we can continue being people of truthfulness rather than people of falsity. So it is a journey from theory to practice, and a practical guide on how we sort ourselves out inwardly. So it's a paradigmatically Sufi type of book, and the consequence is nothing other than the rectification of the content of our ibadah. So the stakes here are big. Let's begin then in the traditional way, and I do like to go through the issues of the Ihya in the way that the Ummah has always approved, which is to read through the text, to get something of the barakah of the text. And also I think as we move through it, we'll realize with reassurance that the Imam, even though he's writing 900 years ago, which is an immense historical gulf that separates us, and a great geographic gulf as well, his voice comes to us across this enormous void. And we know, even if you remember the values that prevailed in your own childhood, you know how much the world has changed since then, and you look at the headlines, the world changes, but 900 years. But still, it's as if he's speaking to us today, and there's really almost nothing in the book that we can't immediately relate to, and that doesn't strike home, and that we can't immediately use in order to improve our actions and our adherence to the sunnah of the chosen one, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the inner life of man, unlike the outer life, doesn't change. The virtues are always the virtues, our weaknesses are always our weaknesses, and so this is a book that is a kind of self-rectification guide for our time. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Kitab al-Niyyati wal-Ikhlasi wal-Sidq. The book of intention, sincerity, truthfulness. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. نحمد الله حمد الشاكرين ونؤمن به إيمان الموقنين ونقر بوحدانيته إقرار الصادقين. Now remember, when the Imam is beginning with these rhyming phrases, this saj'a, he's not doing it just to remind us how many Arabic words he knows. He's doing it because it gets us into the zone and invokes certain phrases, resonances, and other sort of atmospheric elements that help us to forget what we've been thinking about and to get ourselves back into this space, and also to give us some kind of essential flavor of where he wants to go with this topic. So he says, we give praise to Allah, the praise of those who are grateful, and we believe in him with the iman of those who are certain, and we affirm his unity with the affirmation of those who are true and go straight. So he's already invoked the 3 principles of the book in this debadge, this introduction. وَنَشْهَدُ أَن لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ وخالق السماوات والأرضين ومكلف الجن والإنس والملائكة المقربين. And we bear witness that there's no deity but Allah, Lord of the worlds, creator of the heavens and the earths, the one who imposes moral duties upon jinn and mankind, and the angels who had brought nigh, أن يعبدوه عبادة المخلصين. So on these three categories he imposes the duty to worship him sincerely. فقال تعالى وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله مخلصين له الدين. They were commanded only to worship him sincere in their religion. Only. That's what everything is about. If it's not sincere, it's not deen. فما لله إلا دين الخالص المتين. Only pure, strong religion pertains to Allah. فإنه أغنى الأغنياء عن شركة المشاركين, because he is the most indifferent and the most one who is in least need of any partner or any other motive or strength or intention that could be attached to him and to his service. والصلاة على نبيه محمد سيد المرسلين وعلى جميع النبيين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. And blessings upon his prophet Muhammad, master of the messengers, and upon all the prophets, and upon his family and his companions, those who are good and pure. Amma ba'd, to proceed. So he's going on to his introduction. That's kind of what we've heard is a kind of mood music, an invocation, getting us in the right on the right kind of wavelength to receive this signal, and reminding us of the colossal religion establishing or religion breaking importance of this topic. فقد انكشف لأرباب القلوب ببصيرة الإيمان وأنوار القرآن ألا وصول إلى السعادة إلا بالعلم والعبادة. It's become clear to people of sound hearts, with the insight grifted by faith and the lights of the Qur'an, that there is no road to achieving happiness except through knowledge and worship. فالناس كلهم هلك إلا العالمين. This is a famous saying. والعالمون كلهم هلك إلا العاملين والعاملون كلهم هلك إلا المخلصين والمخلصون على خطر عظيم. Which means people are all destroyed except for those who know. And those who know are all destroyed except for those who act. And those who act are all destroyed except those who are sincere. And even the sincere are in grave danger. It's a famous proverb which you hear in khutbahs and so forth. It's quite well known in the Arab world. It originates, it's said, with Sayyidina Sahel al-Tustari, one of the great Iranian Sufis. فَالْعَمَلُ بِغَيْرِ نِيَّةٍ عَنَاءٍ. To act without action, to act without intention is just an effort, just exhausting oneself. وَالنِّيَّةُ بِغَيْرِ إِخْلَاصٍ رِيَاءٍ. And an intention without sincerity is ostentation. وَهُوَ لِلنِّفَاقِ كِفَاءٍ, which is equivalent to hypocrisy. وَمَعَ الْعِصْيَانِ سَوَاءٍ, and is the same thing as disobedience. وَالْإِخْلَاصُ مِنْ غَيْرِ صِدْقٍ وَتَحْقِيقٍ هَبَاءٍ. And sincerity without truthfulness and actually practicing is just dust that's blown by the winds. وَقَدْ قَالَ تَعَالَى فِي كُلِّ عَمَلٍ كَانَ بِإِرَادَةِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ مَشُوبًا مَغْمُورًا. Allah says, of every action that is corrupted by being mingled with something that is not for Him, وَقَدِمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَمِلُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. And we brought forth those actions which they had done, and we turned them into scattered dust. That is the fate of the actions of those who are acting for impure, thoughtless, and incorrect or absent purposes. وَلَيْتَ الشِّعْرِ كَيْفَ يُصَحِّحُ نِيَّتَهُ مَنْ لَا يَعْرِفُ حَقِيقَةَ النِّيَّةِ. I really wish I knew, he says, how somebody who doesn't know what intention is can improve his intention. أو كيف يخلص من صحح النية إذا لم يعرف حقيقة الإخلاص. Or how the one who rectifies his intention can really be pure if he doesn't know the reality of sincerity. أو كيف تطالب المخلص نفسه بالصدق إذا لم يتحقق معناه. Or how can somebody's soul call his sincere self to task if he doesn't know the meaning of truthfulness, this permanent state that ensues from being rightly oriented within. فالوظيفة الأولى على كل عبد أراد طاعة الله تعالى. So the first duty on any servant of Allah who wishes to obey him أن يتعلم النية أولا لتحصل المعرفة, is first of all to learn about intention so that knowledge can come about. ثم يصححها بالعمل بعد فهم حقيقة الصدق والإخلاص, and then bring about a sound intention through acting on its basis after understanding the reality of sidq and ikhlas. اللذين هما وسيلتا العبد إلى النجاة والخلاص, which are the two paths that the servant must tread on the way to salvation and redemption. ونحن نذكر معاني الصدق والإخلاص في 3 أبواب. So we're going to mention these things in 3 chapters. So he always at the beginning of the books of the Ihya gives you a roadmap and explains the table of contents, explains how he's going to walk you through these topics. So الباب الأول في حقيقة النية ومعناها, chapter 1, on the true nature of intention and what it means. الباب الثاني في الإخلاص وحقائقه, chapter 2, about sincerity and its realities. الباب الثالث, chapter 3, في الصدق وحقيقته, on truthfulness and its true nature. So these are the 3 big points of his triangle that he's going to use in order to build his argument. And in this first section, inshallah we'll be able to get a little bit into it today. He talks about niyyah before moving on to ikhlas and sidq, and this first section is made up of 5 chapters. And really, to get a sense of where he's going, we have to look quite seriously at each of these 5 chapters. الباب الأول في النية, chapter 1, about intention. So the first chapter of the 3 divides into بيان فضيلة النية, an exposition of the merit of intention, وبيان حقيقة النية, an exposition of what intention really consists of, وبيان كون النية خيرا من العمل, an exposition of the fact that intention is better than action, وبيان تفضيل الأعمال المتعلقة بالنية, an explanation of how actions are graded in terms of merit, forbidden, permissible, obligatory, in terms of the intention which underlies them, how the intention affects the moral quality of the things that we do. And fifthly, وَبَيَانُ خُرُوجِ النِّيَّةِ عَنِ الْإِخْتِيَارِ, an explanation that intention is outside our control. It's not something we choose. And he's going to end with this. So we begin with the first of these 5, which he's calling بيان فضيلة النية. And in his usual way, because the Ihya is almost a kind of tafsir book really, and it's really packed with scriptural texts, he begins with the Quran and the Adillah. قال الله تعالى ولا تطرد الذين يدعون ربهم بالغداة والعشي يريدون وجهه. Do not drive away those who call their Lord morning and night, wishing for his face. وَالْمُرَادُ بِتِلْكَ الْإِرَادَةِ النِّيَّةِ, and what's meant by this will that they have is niyyah. Their intention is his face. And this is quite characteristic of the Quranic way of framing the idea of doing things sincerely. لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُهُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا, in Surah Al-Insan. We feed you only for Allah's wajh, for his face, for his sake. We don't want any reward or any thanks from you. This is the sign of the people of ikhlas. They do things liwajhillah, for Allah's face, as a characteristic Quranic metaphor. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم أكثر شهداء أمتي أصحاب الفرش ورب قتيل بين الصفين الله أعلم بنيته. This is a hadith narrated by Imam Ahmad. Most of the martyrs of my ummah are those who die in their beds. And many a person who dies between the two ranks in a great battle, Allah knows best what his intention really was. And as we'll see, there's so much information about this and the absolute dependence of the merit of an action on the reason why we do these actions. So قال الله تعالى إن يريدا إصلاحا يوفق الله بينهما. If they, the spouses, wish for reconciliation, Allah will bring about success and reconciliation between them. فجعل نية السبب التوفيق. So he made here intention the reason for tawfiq. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله لا ينظر إلى صوركم وأموالكم وإنما ينظر إلى قلوبكم وأعمالكم. It's a hadith in Sahih Muslim. Allah does not look at your forms and how much money you've got. He looks at your hearts and at what you do. وإنما نظر إلى القلوب لأنها مظنة النية. And the Imam says, why is Allah looking at our hearts? Because they're the place where the niyyah resides. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم الناس أربعة رجل آتاه الله عز وجل علما ومالا فهو يعمل بعلمه في ماله فيقول رجل لو آتاني الله تعالى مثل ما آتاه لعملت كما يعمل فهما في الأجر سواء. The Holy Prophet says sallallahu alayhi wasallam, there's four kinds of people. A man whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives knowledge and wealth, and he acts according to his knowledge in distributing his wealth. And a man says, if Allah gave me the kind of wealth that so-and-so has got, I would do as he is doing. And they are, as the hadith says, fil ajri sawa. They're equal in the reward, just because he wants that. That's his intention. If only, even though it's a kind of impossible conditional, Allah in his generosity will see that goodness in his heart and will give him the reward for that generosity. وَرَجُلٌ آتَاهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى مَالًا وَلَمْ يُؤْتِهِ عِلْمًا. And a man whom Allah gave wealth but didn't give knowledge, فَهُوَ يَتَخَبَّطُ بِجَهْلِهِ فِي مَالِهِ, and makes all kinds of mistakes concerning his wealth because of his ignorance. فَيَقُولُ رَجُلٌ لَوْ آتَانِي اللَّهُ مِثْلَ مَا آتَاهُ. And somebody might say, if Allah gave me what He's given him, عَمِلْتُ كَمَا يَعْمَلُ فَهُمَا فِي الْوِزْرِ سَوَاء. I would do the kind of things he's doing, investing in dubious things and giving money to people who don't deserve it and scratch cards, whatever it might be. If I had his kind of wealth, I'd do the same. He has the same sin as the person who is doing that. So immediately the Imam is making us think carefully about intentions. ألا ترى كيف شركه بالنية في محاسن عمله ومساويه. Don't you see how we partake in the good deeds and bad deeds of others just through the form of our intentions? وكذلك في حديث أنس بن مالك لما خرج رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في غزوة تبوك قال إن بالمدينة أقواما ما قطعنا واديا ولا وطئنا موطئا يغيظ الكفار ولا أنفقنا نفقة ولا أصابتنا مخمصة إلا شركونا في ذلك وهم بالمدينة. قالوا وكيف ذلك يا رسول الله وليسوا معنا؟ قال حبسهم العذر فشركوا بحسن النية. So this is a famous hadith in Bukhari. The Holy Prophet is saying, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when there's people in Medina who cannot equip armies and cannot arm warriors and cannot themselves participate, maybe they're sick, maybe they've got families, in order to defend Medina from the Ahzab and the groups that are out to destroy the people of Islam. And he says, There are people in Medina who don't cross a valley and do not establish themselves in any battle which would enrage the idolaters and don't spend any money and aren't suffering from thirst or hunger, but they are participating with them in all of that, and they're still in Medina. And they said, how is that, Ya Rasulullah, wa laysu ma'ana? How is that, and they're not with us? And he said, they are kept behind by excuses, but they participate through the beauty of their intentions. So we immediately see here, and it's important to keep this in mind, that ours is not a legalistic religion. Sometimes people say, oh, it's all about doing good deeds and getting stuff in the next world as a result of those good deeds, as if things are just a kind of, there's a kind of, salvation is like a mechanism, that you do a whole bunch of good deeds and you get a proportionate amount of treats in the next world. But it's not really inward, it's all about externals. Well, what we're saying here is that it is all about internals, because the outward deeds depend entirely, not for their legal validity, but for their virtuous status on the intention. So this internalizes everything. It's about what's inside ourselves, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. On that day, neither wealth nor progeny shall help human beings except he who comes to Allah with a sound heart. It's in the heart. That's where taqwa resides. It is the heart that is the locus of judgment. Not that the actions will not be shown and that they are not significant. They are. They are divine commandments. But the actions have to be true actions, in other words, actions of the heart, rather than just actions of the tongue and the hand. وروي في الإسرائيليات, it's narrated in the stories of the ancient Israelites, أن رجلا مر بكثبان من رمل في مجاعة, that a man in a time of drought once walked past a sand dune. فقال في نفسه لو كان لي هذا الرمل طعاما لقسمته بين الناس. And he said to himself, if only this sand dune were made of food, I would give it all to the people. فأوحى الله تعالى إلى نبيهم, and Allah revealed to that people's prophet, أن قل له, say to him, إن الله تعالى قد قبل صدقتك, Allah has accepted your charity. وقد شكر حسن نيتك, and is grateful for the purity and the goodness of your intention. وأعطاك ثواب ما لو كان طعاما فتصدقت به, and it's given you the reward that would have accrued to you if it had been food and you had given it away in sadaqah. So a lot of these sayings come from people like Sahl al-Tustari and also people like Imam Abu Talib al-Makki, who is one of the main sources for these stories of the Salaf in the Ihya. Imam Abu Talib al-Makki, who dies in 386, I think, of the Hijrah. Central Asian, but as his name indicates, lives in Makkah, a great Zahid, really not interested in the things of the world, focuses his time on the learning of Shafi'i fiqh and on the narration of hadith, and he produces this amazing book, Qut al-Qulub, the food of the hearts, which to this day is something that the ulama love to read, even though it's a bit difficult to navigate. So Imam Ghazali kind of puts it in its due place in his very encyclopedic and schematic Ihya Ulum ad-Din. وفي حديث أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه من تزوج امرأة على صداق وهو لا ينوي أداءه فهو زان ومن أدى دينا ومن ادان دينا وهو لا ينوي قضاءه فهو السارق. So in this hadith, whoever marries a woman having agreed a dowry and does not have the intention of paying the dowry, he is an adulterer. And whoever takes on a debt intending never to discharge it is considered to be a thief. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم من تطيب لله تعالى جاء يوم القيامة وريحه أطيب من المسك. Whoever puts on perfume for the sake of Allah will come on the day of judgment smelling sweeter than musk. ومن تطيب لغير الله جاء يوم القيامة وريحه أنتن من الجيفة. And whoever puts on perfume for some other reason, to attract people, to show off, whatever it might be, will come on the day of judgment and he will smell worse than a piece of rotting meat. وأما الآثار. So he's dealt with the scriptural material, and he's now giving us sayings of the early Muslims in particular. فقد قال عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه أفضل الأعمال أداء ما افترض الله تعالى والورع عما حرم الله تعالى وصدق النية فيما عند الله تعالى. The best of actions is to discharge the obligations that Allah has imposed upon you, and to be scrupulous in not touching that which Allah has forbidden, and to be true in your intention in your relationship to Him. وكتب سالم ابن عبد الله ابن عمر ابن عبد العزيز اعلم أن عون الله تعالى للعبد على قدر النية. Know that Allah's help to the slave is in accordance with the slave's intention. فمن تمت نيته تم عون الله له. Whoever has a perfect intention, Allah's support for him will be perfect. وإن نقصت نقص بقدره. And to the extent that his intentions are impure or fail, then Allah's support will be diminished. Of course, Allah's support can take forms that we don't even know about, warding off catastrophes that we never even knew were heading our way. It's very difficult often to see the consequence, say, of the relationship between our prayers and outcomes, because we see only a tiny fragment of creation. But what he's saying is, to the extent that we have a good intention, this support will be there. And to the extent that we have a bad intention in what we do, we're absent-minded, we're not really present, then the support will be absent. وقال بعض السلف رب عمل صغير تعظمه النية. A little action is made great through intention. وَرُبَّ عَمَلٍ كَبِيرٍ تُصَغِّرُهُ النِّيَّةِ. And a great deed is made tiny because of intention. قال داود الطائي من كان وقال الثوري كانوا يتعلمون النية للعمل كما تتعلمون العمل. Imam al-Thawri is saying of the early Muslims, they used to learn the intentions pertaining to actions as much as you guys learn about the actions themselves. And this is a concern of the early Muslims, to make sure that they were doing things absolutely right. And this is one of the problems, I think, that we have in today's ummah, in that there's so much talk about outward actions. There have to be outward actions. But somehow there's more talk about action than about the reasons why we do those actions, and the state of the heart, and the extent to which we're really doing things sincerely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and it's relatively easy to get actions right. It's quite difficult to get intentions right. Maybe that's why we've become externalized in this way, because the inward life is difficult and means that we have to be humble. You can feel very proud. I prayed all 6 sunnah rak'ahs after that prayer, and I've done it. Outwardly, yes, you've done it. But if you look at it differently and think, well, what was the inner reality of those prayers, then you're less likely to be arrogant, less likely to be judgmental of others. To the extent that you only see the surfaces of things, you're going to be judging people who seem to be falling short. But to the extent that you know that what matters is what they intend, which you can't see, you'll give them husna zan, the benefit of the doubt. And so externalism leads to a kind of Pharisaic judgmentalism in religion, which is exactly the opposite of what the early Muslims were championing. وقال بعض العلماء اطلب النية للعمل قبل العمل وما دمت تنوي الخير فأنت بخير. seek the intention of your action before doing the action, and to the extent that you intend to do something good, then you're ultimately in a good state. We'll see later on that this can't apply to sins, for instance, because sin cannot become anything other than a sin simply because you have some intention that it's no longer a sin. That can't happen. وكان بعض المريدين يطوف على العلماء يقول, one of the murids, one of the spiritual disciples, used to visit the scholars saying, من يدلني على عمل لا أزال فيه عاملا لله تعالى. Which of you can give me an action that I can do which will be a kind of permanent action so that I'm always doing it for Allah? A prayer and a fast sometimes, but something that is constant. فإني لا أحب أن يأتي علي ساعة من ليل أو نهار إلا وأنا عامل من عمال الله عز وجل. Because I don't like there to be a single moment in my day and my night in which I'm not doing something for my Creator. فقيل له قد وجدت حاجتك فأعمل الخير ما استطعت. And one of them said to him, you found what you are looking for, act in accordance with goodness to the extent that you can. فإذا فترت أو تركته, and if you become wearied or you stop doing it, فهم بعمله, then wish you were still doing it. فإن الهام بعمل الخير كعامله, because the one who wishes he was doing a good deed is in the same degree as the one who is actually doing it. وكذلك قال بعض السلف. Similarly, one of the early Muslims said, إن نعمة الله عليكم أكثر من أن تحصوها. Allah's blessings upon you are beyond numbering. وإن ذنوبكم أخفى من أن تعلموها. And your sins are so hidden that you don't even know what they are. ولكن أصبحوا توابين وأمسوا توابين يغفر لكم ما بين ذلك. But get up in the morning as penitent people, go to bed at night in a state of tawbah as a penitent person, and Allah will forgive you what is between the two. وقال الحسن, by Al-Hasan the Imam means Al-Hasan al-Basri, إنما خلد أهل الجنة في الجنة وأهل النار في النار بالنيات. The people of paradise are made eternally in paradise, and the people of fire in fire eternally because of intentions. وقال أبو هريرة مكتوب في التوراة ما أريد به وجهي فقليله كثير وما أريد به غيري فكثيره قليل. It's written in the Torah, that which intends my good pleasure, my face, a little of it is much. And that which means the pleasure of somebody else, much of it is little. فإذن, and the Imam concludes this section by saying, عماد الأعمال النيات. The foundations, the pillars of actions are the intentions. فالعمل مفتقر إلى النية ليصير بها خيرا. Action absolutely needs intention in order to be a form of goodness. والنية في نفسها خير وإن تعذر العمل بعائق. And a niyyah, an intention, is a good thing even if something gets in the way of putting that into practice. So that's the end of his first bayan, and we move on to the second, which he calls bayanu haqiqati niyyah, an exposition of the true nature of intention. So he's given us these texts from the early Muslims and the Quran to explain why niyyah is so important. Actions are by intentions. And now he wants to try and get into it to explain what is this niyyah? What is it to have an intention? What can we say about it? How can we conceptualize it? How can we worry about it? How can we analyze it? How can we self-diagnose? اعلم أن النية والإرادة والقصد عبارات متواردة على معنى واحد. Know, first of all, he is getting into definitions just to clarify the way he's going to deal with this. Intention and will and purpose are three words which come with the same meaning. وهو حالة وصفة للقلب يكتنفها أمران, which is a state and an attribute of the heart which is shaped and embraced by two things, knowledge and action. وَالْعِلْمُ يَقْدُمُهُ لِأَنَّهُ أَصْلُهُ وَشَرْطُهُ. Knowledge comes first because it's its basis and its condition. And if you don't know that something is a good thing to do, you can't have the intention. So there has to be ilm. وَالْعَمَلُ يَتْبَعُهُ لِأَنَّهُ ثَمَرَتُهُ وَفَرْعُهُ. An action follows after it because it is its fruit and its branch. وَذَلِكَ لِأَنَّ كُلَّ عَمَلٍ أعني كل حركة وسكون. And this is because every action, by which I mean everything in which there is movement or stillness, اختياري, which is volitional, not like sneezing accidentally, for instance, or shaking from cold. These are not volitional actions, and there can't be a niyyah there. فإنه لا يتم إلا بثلاثة أمور. Can only happen when three factors are present. علم وإرادة وقدرة. Knowledge, will, capacity. So these are the bases of every action. It divides into three bits: knowledge, will, capacity. لأنه لا يريد الإنسان ما لا يعلمه. Because human beings can't will that which they don't know. فلا بد وأن يعلم. So one has first of all to know. ولا يعمل ما لم يرد. And you haven't got an action unless you have willed that action. It's not an ikhtiyari volitional action. It's just some movement that has no moral significance. فلا بد من إرادة. So there must be the will. ومعنى الإرادة, and the will is defined as follows: انبعاث القلب إلى ما يراه موافقا للغرض. The heart being aroused to that which it sees to be in correspondence with its purpose. إما في الحال أو في المآل, either in this world or the next. فقد خلق الإنسان بحيث يوافقه بعض الأمور ويلائم غرضه. Because man has been created in such a way as to find a correspondence with some things which serve or which coincide with his purpose. ويخالفه بعض الأمور, and certain things which don't serve or gratify his purpose. فاحتاج إلى جلب الملائم الموافق إلى نفسه. So he feels a need to bring that which coincides with his purposes to his own self. ودفع الضار المنافي عن نفسه, and is created in such a way as to want to push away from himself that which is harmful and which doesn't suit his purpose. فافتقر بالضرورة إلى معرفة وإدراك للشيء المضر والنافع. So he necessarily needs to know a knowledge and to perceive the thing as being harmful or beneficial to himself. حتى يجلب هذا ويهرب من هذا, so that he can bring to himself that which is beneficial and run away from that which is going to harm him. This is instinctual, it's human nature. فإن من لا يبصر الغذاء ولا يعرفه لا يمكنه أن يتناوله. Because somebody who doesn't see food and doesn't know that it's present cannot possibly reach out and take it. ومن لا يبصر النار لا يمكنه الهرب منها. And somebody who doesn't see any fire is not able to run away from it. فخلق الله تعالى الهداية والمعرفة. So Allah created guidance and knowledge. وجعل لها أسبابا, and created or appointed reasons, factors for this knowledge. وهي الحواس الظاهرة والباطنة, and they are the inward and the outward senses. وليس ذلك من غرضنا. But in this book we're not going to talk about them, the senses and how that constitutes the way in which we perceive things that we want and that we don't want. That's another knowledge. ثم لو أبصر الغذاء وعلم أنه موافق له, and then if he does see that there is food there and has the knowledge that it is good for him, فلا يكفيه ذلك للتناول ما لم يكن فيه ميل إليه ورغبة فيه. That is not enough to make him reach out and take it unless he has an inclination for it and a desire for it. وَشَهْوَةٌ لَهُ بَاعِثَ عَلَيْهِ, and an appetite for it which makes him act. إِذِ الْمَرِيضُ يَرَى الْغِذَاءَ وَيَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُ مُوَافِقٌ, because a sick person can see some food and know that it's good for him. وَلَا يُمْكِنُهُ التَّنَاوُلُ لِعَدَمِ الرَّغْبَةِ وَالْمَيْلِ, but is not able to take it because he has no desire for it. وَلِفَقْدِ الدَّاعِيَ الْمُحَرِّكَ إِلَيْهِ, because there's no motivation to eat that food. فَخَلَقَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى لَهُ الْمَيْلَ وَالرَّغْبَةَ وَالْإِرَادَةَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created for us the inclination and the desire and the will. وَأَعْنِي بِهِ نُزُوعًا فِي نَفْسِهِ إِلَيْهِ وَتَوَجُّهًا فِي قَلْبِهِ إِلَيْهِ, by which I mean a yearning, an inclination of the soul for it, and the heart's directedness towards it, an orientation. This is something we want, and our will has to have this raghbah, this desire. ثُمَّ ذَلِكَ لَا يَكْفِي, but even this is not enough. فَكَمْ مِنْ مُشَاهِدٍ طَعَامًا رَاغِبٍ فِيهِ. There are lots of people who see food and want the food, مُرِيدٍ تَنَاوُلَهُ, and want to reach out and take it, عَاجِزٌ عَنْهُ لِكَوْنِهِ زَمِنًا, who are not able to reach out and take it because they're in the grip of a serious illness. فَخُلِقَتْ لَهُ الْقُدْرَةُ وَالْأَعْضَاءُ الْمُتَحَرِّكَةُ حَتَّى يَتِمَّ بِهِ التَّنَاوُلُ. The capacity has been created for man, and the limbs which can move, which enable us to take the food. وَالْعَضْوُ لَا يَتَحَرَّكُ إِلَّا بِالْقُدْرَةِ, and the limb does not move unless there is the capacity to move it. وَالْقُدْرَةُ تَنْتَظِرُ الدَّاعِيَ الْبَاعِثَ, and the power, the capacity waits for the instruction, the da'iyah, the motive in order to do it. وَالدَّاعِيَ تَنْتَظِرُ الْعِلْمَ وَالْمَعْرِفَةِ, and the motive relies on and waits for the knowledge, أو الظن والاعتقاد, or some kind of suspicion. I know this food is good for me, or I think it may be good for me, and that puts the whole process from intention to action into movement. وهو أن يقوى على نفسه كون الشيء موافقا له. فإذا جزمت المعرفة بأن الشيء موافق, and when the human being knows that something is good for him, ولا بد أن يفعل, and has to take it, وسلمت عن معارضة باعث آخر صارف عن, and there's no person out there who's actually, or some other factor that's stopping him from taking the food. إن بعثت الإرادة, the will arises, وتحقق الميل, the inclination becomes real. فإذا انبعثت الإرادة انتهضت القدرة لتحريك الأعضاء. So when the will is aroused, the capacity is mobilized in order to move the limbs. فالقدرة خادمة للإرادة والإرادة تابعة لحكم الاعتقاد والمعرفة. So capacity is the servant of the will, and the will follows the judgment of belief and our knowledge about what this thing is and what the action would be. فالنية عبارة عن الصفة المتوسطة. So we can define intention as an expression for an intermediary quality. وهي الإرادة, which is the will, وانبعاث النفس بحكم الرغبة, and the soul arising because of a desire, والميل إلى ما هو موافق للغرض, and an inclination towards that which serves one's purposes, إما في الحال وإما في المآل, either in this world or in the next. So he's given us this chain of events that indicate how we do things and how to differentiate between will and what we do, and our capacity and knowledge is at the beginning of it all. And niyyah is somewhere, he says, in the middle of this, sifa mutawassita. But it's the essential thing that determines the moral quality of an action, because it's about whether this thing is going to be good for me in this world or perhaps in the next world as well. فالمحرك الأول هو الغرض المطلوب. So the first motivator is the goal which is sought, وهو الباعث, and this is the motive. والغرض الباعث هو المقصد المنوي, and the intention which provokes us to do something is the purpose which we intend. وَالْإِنْبِعَاثُ هُوَ الْقَصْدُ وَالنِّيَّةُ. And the arising of the soul towards something is purpose and intention. وانتهاض القدرة لخدمة الإرادة بتحريك الأعضاء هو العمل. And the activating of capacity in order to serve the will by moving the limbs is action. إلا أن انتهاض القدرة للعمل قد يكون بباعث واحد. However, the operationalizing of the capacity to bring about an action may be on the basis of a single motive. وقد يكون بباعثين اجتمعا في فعل واحد, or could be because there are two purposes, two motives combined in the form of a single action. فإذا كان بباعثين فقد يكون كل واحد بحيث لو انفرد لكان مليا بإنهاض القدرة, وقد يكون كل واحد قاصرا عنه إلا بالاجتماع. Okay, so now he's splitting it down further. It's quite a subtle psychological analysis here, but it's reaching for the heart of what we mean when we say intention. So you can have, he says, two purposes in doing something. And it is possible that each of those two purposes would in fact have been sufficient in order to mobilize the capacity to do the thing. وَقَدْ يَكُونُ كُلُّ وَاحِدٍ قَاصِرًا. But it's possible that the two needed to act together in order to do something. So it's now going to get into the complexity of our intentions. Very often we don't have a singular intention, but we actually mean different things when we are doing something. وَقَدْ يَكُونُ أَحَدُهُمَا كَافِيًا لَوْلَا الْآخَرِ. That one of these two purposes might be enough, but the other is there in order to help and to assist. فيخرج من هذا التقسيم أربعة أقسام فلنذكر لكل واحد مثالا واسعا. So from this differentiation of the inner structure of the intention, there are four categories. And he says, let us look at each of these four modalities of our intention and give some examples and also give a term for this type of intention. Now, this is where he's talking about composite intentions, which is overwhelmingly how our intentions are. أما الأول, so first type. فهو أن ينفرد الباعث الواحد ويتجرد. This is where there is a single, stripped away, singular motive. So this can sometimes happen. There's just one reason why we're doing something, a singular intention. كما إذا هجم على الإنسان سبع فكلما رآه قام من موضعه. So he gives the example of if somebody is attacked by a lion, as soon as he sees it, he stands up. فلا مزعج له إلا غرض الهرب من السبع. There's no reason why he's running away and getting up. Why does he stand up when he sees the lion? Because he's afraid of the lion, and that's his only reason for running. فإنه رأى السبع وعرفه ضارا, because he sees the lion, he knows that it's harmful. فانبعثت نفسه إلى الحرب, so his soul automatically, instinctually prepares itself to run. ورغبت فيه, and is determined to run. فانتهضت القدرة عاملة بمقتضى الانبعاث. And so the capacity acts in accordance with the motive immediately. فيقال نيته الفرار من السبع. So here we say his intention is to flee from the lion. لا نية له في القيام غيره. There's no other reason why he stood up when he saw the lion. وهذه النية تسمى خالصة. And this intention is called خالصة, which you can kind of translate as pure or sincere, but it is possible in the English language at any rate which doesn't quite overlap with these Arabic terms, to have a pure intention in the sense that it's a virtuous intention, even if it's a composite intention that means to do different things. But in the Arabic, ikhlas really means to reduce, to purify, to filter something so that it's singular and a single thing. So let's stick with that. This intention is called pure, a pure intention. ويسمى العمل بموجبه إخلاصا بالإضافة إلى الغرض والباعث. An action on its basis is called ikhlas, with reference to its purpose and its motive. ومعناه أنه خلص عن مشاركة غيره وممازجته. And its meaning is that it's pure of being intermingled with any other reason for the action. He stood up just because he saw the lion, not to be polite to somebody or to see the stars just because of the lion. So that's ikhlas. So that's the first state of the intention. وأما الثاني فهو أن يجتمع باعثان كل واحد مستقل بالإنهاض لو انفرد. The second state is for there to be two motives present, and each one would be sufficient to provoke the action, even if the other one was not present. ومثاله من المحسوس, a practical, tangible example would be أن يتعاون رجلان على حمل شيء بمقدار من القوة كان كافيا في الحمل لو انفرد. Two men get together to lift a heavy weight. Actually, one of them would be enough to lift it. ومثاله في غرضنا, and in our context, what we mean, an example would be as follows. أن يسأله قريبه الفقير حاجة فيقضيها لفقره وقرابته. A poor relative comes to you and asks for help, and you help him because of his poverty and because he's a relative. وعلم أنه لولا فقره لكان يقتضيها بمجرد القرابة. And you know that even if he wasn't poor, you'd still help him out because he was a relative. وأنه لولا قرابته لكان يقضيها بمجرد الفقر. And even if he wasn't a relative, you'd help that person out just because they were poor. وعلم ذلك من نفسه بأن يحضره قريب غني فيرغب في قضاء حاجته. And you can know this by imagining that a rich person who's a relative comes to you, and you know that you'd help them even if they were rich. You'd still extend some help because it's a relative. وفقير أجنبي فيرغب أيضا في. Similarly, a poor person not known to you would come and you'd still help them out, even if that person was ajnabi and not a relative. So you can kind of test yourself to see the nature of your intentions in this case, whether one would be enough. And this is important because if one is not a good one and one is good, then you need to be able to see whether the good one preponderates. وكذلك من أمره الطبيب بترك الطعام ودخل عليه يوم عرفة فصام. Similarly, the person whose doctor tells him not to eat, and then the day of Arafah comes along and he fasts, وهو يعلم أنه لو لم يكن يوم عرفة لكان يترك الطعام حمية, and he knows that even if it hadn't been Arafah, he wouldn't have been eating because of his fever. ولولا الحمية لكان يتركه لأجل أنه يوم عرفة, and he knows that even if he hadn't been sick, he would have fasted anyway because it was Arafah. وقد اجتمعا جميعا, and they'd come together, they'd coincided. فأقدم على الفعل وكان الباعث الثاني رفيق الأول. And so he performs the action. And so the second motive is the companion of the first motive. فلنسمي هذا مرافقة البواعث. Associative or coinciding motives. He's giving, you'll remember, this fourfold categorization of the reasons why we do things and the nature, the complexity of those reasons. So this is the second category. The first was, there's just one reason. Now there's two, but you would have done it for one of those motives anyway. والثالث, number 3. ألا يستقل كل واحد لو انفرد. The third is when one of those motives wouldn't actually have been enough on its own. ولكن قوي مجموعهما على إنهاض القدرة. But put together, those motives are enough to motivate your capacity and you perform the act. ومثاله في المحسوس. A physical example, again, أن يتعاون ضعيفان على حمل ما لا ينفرد أحدهما به. If two weak men together carry a heavy weight that no one of them on his own would have been able to lift. ومثاله في غرضنا, and for our purposes, an example would be أن يقصده قريبه الغني فيطلب درهما فلا يعطيه ويقصده الأجنبي الفقير فيطلب درهما فلا يعطيه. So an example would be a rich relative comes to us and asks us for sixpence. We don't give it to him. And then a poor stranger comes to us and asks us for sixpence. We don't give it to him. ثم يقصده الفقير القريب فيعطيه. But then a relative who is poor comes to us and we do give it to him. فيكون انبعاث داعيته بمجموع الباعثين. So his capacity is moved by his will when these two factors are operating together. وهو القرابة والفقر, being a relative and being poor. وكذلك الرجل يتصدق بين يدي الناس لغرض الثواب ولغرض الثناء. Similar is the case of the man who gives charity in public in order to achieve God's reward, but in order also to be praised. ويكون بحيث لو كان منفردا, and is in a state such that if he'd been on his own, no one's looking, لكان لا يبعثه مجرد قصد الثواب على العطاء. The desire for God's reward would not be enough to make him give. ولو كان الطالب فاسقا لا ثواب في التصدق عليه. And if the person had been a corrupt person, there would be no merit, no reward in giving charity to that person. لكان لا يبعثه مجرد الرياء على العطاء. If he'd been like that, simply desiring to show off wouldn't be enough for him to give either. ولما اجتمعا أورثا بمجموعهما تحريك القلب. But when those two things were together, there's the sadaqah box and it's outside the mosque and all of the other uncles are watching, and he does believe in Allah and he wants the reward and it's the time for sadaqah and he gives the sadaqah, but he's concerned that they should see him. And if one of those intentions alone were taken away, he wouldn't be doing it. That's what the Imam is talking about to him here. That's when his heart is moved. وَلْنُسَمِّ هَذَا الْجِنْسِ مُشَارَكَةً. So let's call this type of intention cumulative motivation. In other words, the one intention is not enough, but when there's two, whatever they might be, that's enough to tip the balance, and we act. والرابع, number 4, أن يكون أحد الباعثين مستقلا لو انفرد بنفسه والثاني لا يستقل. It sometimes happens that one of our two emotions is enough to make us do the thing, and the second one is not enough. ولكن لما انضاف إليه لم ينفك عن تأثير الإعانة والتسهيل. But when we have the second motivation, it certainly helps and facilitates the action that we do. ومثاله في المحسوس, the tangible example, is for a weak man to help a strong man who could himself be able to lift something. It just makes it easier for the strong man. Some of the weight has been taken off his shoulders. ولو انفرد القوي لاستقل. The strong man could have done it on his own. But still, the weak man who couldn't have done it on his own is still helping. فإن ذلك بالجملة يسهل العمل ويؤثر في تخفيفه. This makes the action easier and makes the load lighter. ومثاله في غرضنا, and for our purposes, أن يكون للإنسان ورد في الصلاة وعادة في الصدقات. For our purposes, if a Muslim has a regular practice of prayer and a customary way of giving charity, فاتفق أن حضر في وقتها جماعة من الناس, and it so happens that at the time he's about to do these things, a bunch of people turn up, فصار الفعل أخف عليه بسبب مشاهدتهم. Doing these things becomes easier for him because they're watching. وعلم من نفسه أنه لو كان منفردا خاليا, but he knows in himself that if he'd been completely alone with no one watching, لم يفتر عن عمله, he wouldn't have stopped doing that practice. وعلم أن عمله لو لم يكن طاعة لم يكن مجرد رياء يحمله عليه. And he knows that his action, even if it was not obedience, it was not pure ostentation either that impelled him to do it. فهو شوب تطرق إلى النية. So this is a pollution which has made its way into the mix of the intention. وَلْنُسَمِّ هَذَا الْجِنْسَ مُعَاوَنَةً. Let's call this type, his fourth type, supportive motivation. And then he, to close the section, recaps. فالباعث الثاني إما أن يكون رفيقا أو شريكا أو معينا. So the second purpose in this composite intention is either something that coincides with it, or something that is cumulative and enables it, or something that is supportive. And in the chapter on Ikhlas, سَنَذْكُرُ حُكْمَهَا, we will explain the ruling that pertains to actions which have been driven by each of these four categories of intention. وَالْغَرَضُ الْآن بَيَانُ أَقْسَابِ النِّيَّات. But our intention now is just to expound the categories of intentions. فَإِنَّ الْعَمَلَ تَابِعٌ لِلْبَاعِثِ عَلَيْهِ, because the action is dependent upon the motive which lies behind it. فَيَكْتَسِبُ الْحُكْمَ مِنْ, and takes its moral quality, its moral judgment from it. وَلِذَلِكَ قِيلَ إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. The famous Bukhari hadith, the first hadith in Bukhari, actions are only by intentions. وَلِأَنَّهَا تَابِعَةٌ لَا حُكْمَ لَهَا فِي نَفْسِهَا وَإِنَّمَا الْحُكْمُ لِلْمَتْبُوعِ. So the judgment pertains to the intentionalized action, not to the action on its own. Actions are by intentions. That's why this very subtle and in English perhaps slightly awkward phraseology comes about. Actions are by intentions. Actions are in accordance with intentions. Actions are judged by intentions. There's lots of different translations that try to get to the heart of this Arabic. So that's the end of his second bayan, and we've dealt with it quite fully because it really is the important place where he actually drills down into what's going on in our intentions. What is the relationship between our knowledge and the factors that make us do things, and therefore the moral and spiritual quality of the things that we do? Where is niyyah in all of that? And also what happens in this all-important question of the niyyah that is not mukhlisa in his term, the niyyah that is composite, where we're doing things for different reasons. And this becomes the essence of his discussion, the simple niyyah, running away from the tiger, pretty unusual in our religious lives, basically. Often our intention is to please ourselves, to make ourselves feel good that we've prayed or done our zakat or whatever. We get a kind of endorphin rush out of that, but that's not the purity of the intention. And very often riya or ostentation can be an ostentation in which we show off to ourselves, which is one of the kind of complex aspects of, it's a type of shirk almost, where we are not doing things mukhlisin, directly for Allah. So clearly this is, as we've seen, gigantically important, because everything we do in our religion depends on it. The quality of our prayers, and we pray 5 times a day, which adds up to about 1,800 prayers a year. And it really, the quality of all of that is to do with the reason why we're doing it. And so that's why he's spending so much time sort of dissecting the question of intention in order that we can understand why we mean things and what we mean by them. We'll do a little bit because the book is so rich and we're not going to do it justice. But we will go into the next section before we finish, which is the third section. بيان سر قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم نية المؤمن خير من عمله. An exposition on the meaning of his saying صلى الله عليه وسلم, the believer's intention is better than his action. This is a famous hadith. The believer's intention is better than his action. You actually hear it a lot. What does it mean? And quite often sort of lazy people like all of us will use this to say, well, I didn't really do those things, but I would have done them and I meant to do them, and we kind of make excuses for ourselves on the basis of what we think is our mu'min niyyah. But he's going to take this apart for us. اعلم أنه قد يظن أن سبب هذا الترجيح أن النية سر لا يطلع عليه إلا الله تعالى. So know that some people might think that the reason why intention is better than action for the believer is because intention is a sir, a mystery, a secret, whose reality is only known to Allah. وَالْعَمَلُ ظَاهِر, but the action is manifest. وَلِعَمَلِ السِّرِّ فَضْلٌ, and that which is inward and hidden is superior. وهذا صحيح, this is true, ولكن ليس هو المراد. That's not what this hadith means. لأنه لو نوى أن يذكر الله تعالى بقلبه أو يتفكر في مصالح المسلمين, because had he intended to remember Allah in his heart or to consider how to serve the interests of the Muslims, فيقتضي عموم الحديث أن تكون نية التفكر خيرا من التفكر. This would mean that intending to meditate is actually better than the meditation itself, which is not right either. So that won't work. وقد يظن, another interpretation of this critical hadith about niyyah is that سبب الترجيح أن النية تدوم إلى آخر العمل, is that the intention continues until the end of the action. وَالْأَعْمَالُ لَا تَدُومُ. Actions themselves, however, aren't permanent. وهو ضعيف. This is a weak interpretation. لأن ذلك يرجع معناه إلى أن العمل الكثير خير من القليل. Because the meaning of this is that basically that a lot of action is better than a little action. بل ليس كذلك. But it doesn't mean that. فإن نية أعمال الصلاة قد لا تدوم إلا في لحظات معدودة. Because the intention to do the prayer might not last for more than a few moments. والأعمال تدوم, while the actions are continuing. وقد يقال, so third attempt to understand this hadith, إن معناه أن النية بمجردها خير من العمل بمجرده دون النية. The third explanation is that intention on its own is better than an action without intention. وهو كذلك. That is correct. ولكنه بعيد أن يكون هذا المراد, but it is quite far-fetched to say that this is what the hadith means here. إذ العمل بلا نية أو على الغفلة لا خير فيه أصلا, because action without intention or in a state of dreamy heedlessness has no good in it at all. والنية بمجردها خير, but the niyyah on its own is something good. وظاهر الترجيح للمشتركين في أصل الخير. And it's evident that both are considered to be superior in the basis of goodness. So that can't be what this means either. Because you can't really say that the quality of the action can be somehow differentiated from the intention that lies behind it. So these three attempts to explain the hadith seem to have failed. بل المعني به, the real thing that's meant by it, أن كل طاعة تنتظم بنية وعمل, every act of obedience to God composed of action, of intention and action, كانت النية من جملة الخيرات. The intention is one of the forms of goodness. وكان العمل من جملة الخيرات, and the action is also one of the aspects of goodness. ولكن النية من جملة الطاعة خير من العمل. But the intention, insofar as it is part of the totality of the act of worship, is better than the action component of it. Okay, so A, to explain, لكل واحد منهما أثر في المقصود. Both of these aspects, intention and action, have a influence in bringing about what is purposed. وأثر النية أكثر من أثر العمل. But the effect of the intention is more than the effect of the action itself. فمعناه نية المؤمن من جملة طاعته خير من عمله الذي هو من جملة طاعته. So what is meant by the hadith is that the intention of the believer in this composite of the action with its intention is better than the part of that composite action that comprises the action itself. In other words, it's a kind of icing on the cake. It's the best part of it. فهما عملان. So they are both actions. والنية من الجملة خيرهما فهذا معناه. And the intention is the best of the two parts that constitute the totality of the act. And this is what it means. And he speaks some more about this amazing thing, which talks about and goes on to talk about where the niyyah is to be found, which is in the heart. And it's a shame that we really are running late now, and we can't do justice to this, but he does mention the famous hadith in Bukhari, من هم بحسنة فلم يعملها كتبت له حسنة. Whoever intends to do a good deed and doesn't do it, a good deed is still written for him. And you'll recall that the hadith goes on to say, and if he does do the deed, 10 good deeds are written to his account. لأن هم القلب هو ميله إلى الخير وانصرافه عن الهوى وحب الدنيا. Because the heart's purpose or concern in this case is its inclination to do something good and its turning away from its own desires and love of the dunya. وهو غاية الحسنات, and this is the utmost of goodness. So there's so much richness here, so many jewels which we haven't removed yet from this golden chest, but we do have to end this first class here, inshallah, and we'll be moving on next time, inshallah, to the fourth of the 5 sections in the book on the section on niyyah, بيان تفصيل الأعمال المتعلقة بالنية, which is where he tries to grade actions related to intention, looking basically at actions that are forms of disobedience to God, actions that are forms of obedience to God, and actions that are kind of neutral, that could have different intentions, and seeing how intentions can push things out of some of those categories and into other categories, and how we can get some intuitive sense of the inward worth of actions on the basis of the purity of the intention that lies behind them. But that's for next time, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum wal afu minkum wassalamu alaykum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.